So just to kind of go over this, I know we talked about it a little bit last week when we were prepping, but I want to make sure that we're good. So we want to kind of start by doing like background of wisdom literature. Do we want to, like, I know I talked a lot about like the narrative driven focus because I think that helps people keep track because it's a big book, or would you rather just talk about the themes and like pull it out of the story and then have people go back and read it themselves? Like, what would your preference be on this one for the
Um,
order?
I
Because
mean,
like,
yeah, like an
yeah,
overview of. Sorry, let
I
me.
think I might have been
Okay.
wrong about it. That's
Well, I
why I'm
sort of
asking.
have it. Oh, that's okay. Like, yeah, towards the top, I have an outline sort of written based on what we talked about last week. So, yeah, doing a little bit of background, some
Okay.
common interpretations of Job, not understandings. That's a weird word to use. Interpretations.
Interpretations.
Some considerations going into it, and then preview of the question. Yeah, which is more of a tease. This is more of a
I'm
side note, anyways.
really excited. Well, I
But
don't
it
know.
does definitely affect the interpretation of the text.
Well, it's a key question, I think, and I think that's kind of part of how you interpret literature and like why. I think it highlights a sub point that's critical for our listeners, right? So, like, can I just ask it so like we can kind of do the thought exercise? So if it is a literal interpretation, what does it
Yeah.
say about God's character versus if it's an allegorical interpretation or if it's wisdom literature or it has some kind of like, nuanced meaning to it, if it's trying
Mhm.
to prove a point, like what is that saying different? So like it's a really critical piece to know the genre because I mean that's like the fundamental part of exegesis. So yeah, it's like not critical, but it's critical if that makes sense. Like I don't know, like are you familiar with
Mhm.
phenomenology?
Phenomenology. Oh, geez, I should know that one. I feel like
Should
I looked
I
that up a
is
while
this
ago.
way too like can I just explain it so it's easy and you don't have to look it up because
Phenomenology.
it's literally notoriously complex.
The science of phenomena as distinct from that of the nature of being, an approach that concentrates on the study of consciousness and the objects of direct experience.
Yes.
Interesting.
In other
So
words,
basically, how we interact with non-physical things.
no. In other words,
Is that what it is?
it's
Oh,
so instead because like when Kant and like philosophers ask like how do we know something to be true, they give criteria and they're like, well, I can or I cannot know a thing in itself. Phenomenologists say that's
mm.
a pointless question, or it's not a pointless question. But before we ask that question, shouldn't we ask the question, what are the lenses with which I look at? Because wouldn't that dictate how you answer that question to begin with? So it's a step back from the basic epistemology to some extent,
Mm.
or at least that's how some phenomenologists see themselves, particularly like Husserl.
Okay.
That's really pretentious. Anyway, that's the point. And like as it pertains to this, I think that this is one of those phenomenological. I can't say that 10 times. Phenomenological questions about like how we interpret the text. Because that's what
Yeah.
we're asking. It's essentially like a parallel to what we're asking in interpretation. Like, what are the lenses that we're going to assume when we record this to understand? Did that make sense? What I'm saying, Ben? So like that's why I want to keep it because I think it
Mhm.
brings a really it's not the main point, but it brings a critical sub point and it prevents us from having to play the whole game through the whole recording of like, well, if it's not literal or if it is literal, then you could understand it this way. Like because I just feel like that's difficult. I feel like
Yeah.
if you assume a literal
Like what?
understanding,
Like yeah.
no, you're good. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say no. That's right. Because then, like by the end, we'd just be beating a dead horse, and it would sort of lose its value at that point.
Yeah, and I
To be
think that
like,
yeah,
yeah, like ask that question every single time. Because I feel like that's a question you could really only ask right at the beginning of Job or right at the end of Job. Because I feel like for most of what we're gonna do, like in the dialogues, that's kind of a pointless question to ask because it doesn't really apply, in my opinion.
I, well, it does, but it doesn't. But I hear what you're saying. Like it's at the beginning, it helps you understand how you approach the story, and then like it may taint how you see the dialogues. At the end, after you've dealt with all that, and you're like, "Holy crap! I just digested all that information." It's like, how do I deal with it? You know what I mean? Like, was Job just a
Yeah.
sad, whiny dude, or was there like a point to all this? You know what I mean? Like, was he a faithful, whiny guy, or
Right.
like is he like a better person than I don't know. Anyway, that's really mean to Job. Job is a great guy. Truly, God even says
Oh,
so.
that's okay.
Uh,
Well, I just mean like, yeah, because I'm like for the dialogues, I feel like whether or not it actually happened doesn't matter because the questions are being asked and the issues are being raised. So that's why I said it only
fair
matters
enough.
at the beginning
Fair.
or the end where you have more narrative taking place. And like that does it would change how you interpret the dialogues, but it wouldn't change the dialogues themselves. And like, or would it? It doesn't
So,
matter
so
because
this
we're not
is
going to
this. No,
do that.
yeah,
So,
that's fair, but this is the phenomenological question, though, right? Does it change the thing in itself, the way you interpret it, or not? I don't know.
yeah.
Sorry. You know that Carl Honor guy that I'm really into?
Hmm.
He's really into phenomenology, and he uses, like, okay, this is a side note and then we'll get back to it. So like he's really into phenomenology, and he makes an argument for like a phenomenological case that like one of the human experiences is the way that we hear God. So he calls us hearers in the world. So like we hear in the world, and like God's activity is called spirit in the world. So like to some extent we hear the spirit in the world. So when God moves, which is in like, and he defines it in like hundreds of thousands of amazing ways, like literally anytime, like our natural human default position, like our existential position, like to be a human is to be oriented to hear God's word. And it's like some of the most powerful, fruitful theology I've ever encountered. And not only is it like theologically, like,
Hmm.
like Karl Barth, like, like, wow, holy crap, and like heady, but it's like really practical too, because like ultimately, like now your ministry has a new kind of purpose, and it's different than Bart, who's just trying to like restore God as like important and like say God needs to be in our lives, not just our ethics. You know what I mean? Like this one's saying that like no, your entire life
Hmm.
is painted by like essentially the Catholic equivalent to prevenient grace, which is a really, really, I think, fun thing to think about. Sorry, Ben, I can't help it, but I don't know. Maybe the listeners will like the side notes. Anyway,
That's okay.
that's why I'm thinking about phenomenology
Carl
and why I think the
Ronner.
questions are really relevant. Yeah, what about him?
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just going to answer my own question. I'm going to look it up here. No, it wasn't. Carl Ronner. What books did he write? I was thinking he was the author of Christ and Culture, but that's Richard Niebuhr.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite books as
Did he write?
well.
Well,
No,
obviously
I,
not.
I read of Christ and Culture last year, and it's super. I mean, it's awesome. It's H. Richard Niebuhr, who I love as well. No, hero, Spirit in the World, Spirit in the Word, Spirit in the World, Hearers of the Word. And then he also has a very famous book that's a collection of his essays, because he was a Catholic priest. So like not only was he teaching, but he was also like doing mass and stuff. So like he didn't really have a lot of time to constantly write books, even because he was teaching full time and as a priest. So he would write articles like a ton, just because he could get his thoughts like a little bit. So he's got a collected series of essays that's like kind of like his like big works that like everybody gets, and that basically by virtue of how many essays he wrote lays out like an unintentional systematic theology that became the
Hmm.
foundations of Vatican II. So no big deal, you know. Arguably the most significant change in Catholic Church history is like
Yeah.
casual guy writing articles because doesn't have time to write a book.
Is he a saint?
No,
Okay.
technically he's not. He's on the liberal end of orthodoxy, and some hard conservative Catholics don't consider him orthodox, but
Ah.
the Pope did not. So the Pope didn't say a thing. He's fine with it. So, but he's further left than John Paul and Pope Benedict, so Ratzinger, but he's further right than a lot of the more traditional liberal Catholics, if that makes
Okay.
sense,
Yeah.
like Hans Kuhn.
Okay.
He
Okay.
tried to take a middle ground, is what he tried to do, but
Oh,
you know,
gotcha.
anyway,
Hmm.
very
That's okay.
Thomist. Sorry.
It's all good.
So back to note
Um,
prep.
yes. So Job. All right. So we're gonna start. I'll do some background on wisdom literature, common interpretations of Job. I'm just gonna throw out a couple ideas. I'm not gonna go deep into how that affects our interpretation. I'm just gonna bring out these are different ways of understanding it. A couple other things like no, I'll save that for the end. I was gonna say where Job's placed in the Bible and how that can affect how we like where we assume it fits within like biblical genres. Um, but I'm gonna change my mind on that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna
Okay.
wait for the end about that when we actually. But then we will preview the question: is this literal history? And if so, what does that say about God? If it's not literal history and this is more an allegory or a fictional work, what would that say about God, or how would that affect our interpretation?
Yeah, I have a good example. I was going to give an example of are you from like basically like to highlight why that's important in like Job itself. I was going to talk about like Abraham's sacrifice and God testing people because it's also very relevant to Job. Like,
Hmm.
have you ever read Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard?
No.
Okay. Well, to summarize it, because I can, he believes that faith should be a posture of risk and you have to take this big leap. Like it requires like a big jump. And to some extent, I agree with that. Sometimes I don't. But for him, he had to, like, this is a real story and you're going to laugh because this is a super high school, but this is like 1700. So keep it, keep it in perspective.
Yeah.
He had to break up with
Okay.
his fiance to give his life to writing about who God was and to committing himself to the faith of the church, right? In order to really pursue it in its totality, because that was his Isaac moment. So he didn't lose her, but he lost her, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
Abraham loses,
I
but doesn't lose Job.
Yeah. I remember that story from Soren Kierkegaard. Yeah, but
Yeah.
didn't he voluntarily just I didn't know he gave her up for his writings. I thought he saw that story and was like, well, in order to really gain what God wants for us, we have to give up the things that we value. And so like he deliberately just broke up with her to be like, because I want to get what God actually wants for me. So I have to sacrifice this. But then
Yeah, more
like
or less.
she
Yeah.
never got
Like
back with
that's
him.
well, no, he kept writing to her and she kept like, it was like, hey, like you ended this, so what do you want me to do? Um,
Yeah.
he was a different dude. He was kind of toxic, honestly, in some ways. But like compare
That's very
that to like a more
tragic.
modern. It is right, a more modern
Yeah.
interpretation, like which would be something like, you know, this is a story of like God's judgment and requiring a sacrifice to have penance, right, of some form to
Mm,
like create that justification. Yet God in His grace reveals Himself and provides the ram, right? So it's not a test of Abraham as much as it's God showing who he is by being just and requiring that of you, but also being willing to give that. And that ram can symbolize our character of the person Jesus Christ, and that might be emblematic of why his heads are in the thorns. Right?
mm,
And like that's not a perfect interpretation, but it's a valid interpretation. And the point is like one, you if you treat it really literally, you may miss out on that symbolism and that like imagery. If you don't, like, and you're open to that, you can maybe there's possibility that you can see who God is in a different way, and it might reveal some things about His character that you will know to
mm.
be true. Does that make sense? So I think
Yeah, it
it's
does.
important to like frame how we pitch Job, but if you think that's too much, tell me to kick rocks.
No, I think it's fine. Like just something to consider. Though I might have a follow up, but let me just play this out a little bit. I do think that's interesting because it also brings up because in that regard, okay, you want to read Abram and Isaac as just strictly allegory; it never actually happened, versus it did. The meaning of the text really doesn't change. Like you still have that meaning, you still have that value that's present there. Job, I feel is a little different because whether or not you treat it as literal, it absolutely changes the meaning of the text, in my opinion. Of course, that's the question that we want people to consider. But um, yeah, I guess it's similar. Geez, this is too drastic. But the point I'm trying to make is like how people say, is it really important that Jesus physically rose from the dead, like as a literal thing? It's like, yeah, absolutely. Like that's pretty important. It can't just be a metaphor. Um, I don't know.
Well,
Should we
yeah,
should we tease that a little bit or no? Just leave it there.
maybe. Well, here's my thought. Like what I'm saying with like specifically going back to the Abraham Isaac passage as a literal interpretation,
Hmm.
it never occurred to someone like Kierkegaard to consider it as saying, if this didn't happen, what is the point that you think they're trying to make about God?
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Because it's literal. That's not a question that can be asked in the same way, right?
Hmm.
Because it's a historical event. So granted that it happened and that God did do this, he asked them to do this and then bailed them out, but he asked them to do this. Like, it must be a test versus like if it's not literal history, like how do we understand God in light of this? You know what I mean? It opens the
Hmm.
door. I think a non-literal history opens the door for a more rich Christological interpretation, a more rich like other types of interpretive methods. That's just my opinion. I don't
Hmm.
like I'm not a biblical scholar, so I shouldn't like, this, but I can't claim that. But I don't
Yeah.
know. Does that help you or is that just annoying? You can tell me to kick rocks.
No, it's helpful. It's like what I did with the Genesis videos.
Yeah, your Genesis
Um,
videos were awesome. Morgan was locked
I'll
into.
all 2 of them that were posted because I
I'll never
still
forget
haven't
that.
finished editing Genesis 2. I meant to do
Dude,
that,
you're
and I just
fine. You're fine.
but
One
yeah,
of the
like, that was a point I made on Genesis 1, which was actually reading that as literal history diminishes the value that you can get from it,
yeah,
because reading it more allegorically actually opens up the door to,
to the
like, what you were saying.
possibility.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, like, I think that's a valid thing to say. I think it's fine if we bring
yeah.
that up.
And it's like I'm not anti-literalist. I mean, I'm not pro-literalist for certain, but like I just I just think that you can sell some things short
Yeah,
by being caught up in the historicity rather than being caught up in the character of God, but whatever.
yeah. Or I guess I don't know, but then, like, yeah, there's stuff like that where it's like, I mean, if you wanna read it as literal, I think that's fine, but you shouldn't exclude the value of the allegory either.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like and that's and I think it just gets harder to do that. But yes, you're like theoretically you could come to the same interpretations because it is the same story. It's just I think a literal interpretation in some sense grounds you a little bit in a way where those are harder questions to ask. But that
I
doesn't mean that you can't get there.
Yeah. I feel like I just critiqued my entire approach to Job. Whether like my approach to whether or not it's history or not. I feel like I just undercut my own argument by saying what I did. And it doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, like we'll never know definitive. Like to some extent, we won't know definitively. But what we can do is we can make an argument for the best explanation. Like what
Yeah.
explanation based on the information we have has the best explanatory power. What explains it the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's fair. Yep.
So no, Ben, you're right.
Fair enough.
You're right because it makes sense, and I agree with you. I'm just kidding. No, because it's good explanatory power. All right. Do you want to start? I know we're prepping, but do you that so for the intro? This is what I'm thinking that what we'll do is we'll go through like the background of literature and wisdom. Um, I know you have some things for that. Common interpretations of Job, and then can I do the preview of the question and like kind of talking about the lenses with which we approach the text, like the posture that we're approaching the text. That's okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I can transition back. Do you want to do the walkthrough of the narrative, or how do you want to break that up?
Um it doesn't matter. If you want to do, I mean, it's literally just sort of a walkthrough. I don't want to go into great detail. Basically just, there's a man named Job. He had several children. He was a righteous man. He was very prosperous. Then I'm going to try to mark verses in my Bible here so I can follow along. Verse 6, which is where the conflict comes into play, where Satan and the angels, some angels go before the Lord. God and Satan end up having a conversation. I feel weird saying Satan because I feel like that's not doing justice to the text, but I don't know what else to use. The accuser. We just say the accuser. That's the literal Hebrew there.
Yeah, but the article the indicates that it's like like not
Yeah,
necessarily like the Satan capital S, but like it'd be
right.
like
And I
the
do want to
accuser.
touch on that. Right. So I guess to pause for a second, what I'm thinking is we can do an overview of the story and then go back and just highlight certain parts,
Mhm.
and that could be it for today. Um, that's my thinking. So that'll be a point we can come back to, but we can just name him the accuser, and then we'll explain it once we get through the narrative. So we do that. All right, then God. Oh, geez, where is it? And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" The accuser answered the Lord, "From roaming about on the earth, walking around it." The Lord said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I ever noticed that. Satan didn't say anything about he went around testing people or anything like that. He was just like, basically, while I was roaming around the earth and just sort of checking it out, God's the one that presented the idea of testing Job. Satan didn't say anything about that. I just never noticed that in the order of the story. Anyways, so the Lord said to the accuser, "If you consider my servant Job, there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God, turning away from evil." This is a section we could probably just read verbatim.
What section is this?
Um, this is chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. Those three we could probably just straight up read because that sets the story.
Okay,
If
I'm
you can
getting
send
an
my stuff in
underline.
chat.
An underline. Wow, an outline together. Wow, I don't know preposition is out. No, out's not even a preposition. Dear Lord, dude, I am struggling today.
That's okay. Um,
I blame the hibiscus.
that's okay. Yeah, it's the accuser who puts forth the idea of um blah blah blah. Well, okay. I guess he is the one that's like,
Ooh,
okay, what
what?
does he say? Does Job fear God for nothing? You've made a hedge around him and his house and all that he has. You've blessed the works of his hands. His possessions have increased in the land. Um, but take from him everything that he has, and he will surely curse you to his face. Okay, so I guess it is the accuser that puts forth the challenge. Um,
Yeah, he does put forward the challenge. He's like, well, he just questions Job's motives, you know.
yeah, basically, like he has question. Yeah, you're right. He's the accuser questions Job's motives and is essentially like, I mean, yeah, God, you say this dude's blameless and upright, but I mean, come on, let's just be real here. He probably is not really like that. It's probably just because, you know, all of that. Um, so
Yeah.
then God allows the accuser.
Did you see that I got a little bit going in the Word doc? Golly,
Yeah,
why
yeah,
would
yeah. Sorry.
so,
Yeah,
no,
I'm
you're
just
good.
walking through this mostly for my own benefit. So then the accuser goes, actually, wait. Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him. Okay, so I guess the accuser did do it. Because it actually doesn't say the accuser, but it's implied. Um, then you have a series of messengers coming quite comically. Um, all of, I know, these various peoples. You have the Sabians, you have different thieves, you have stuff like that. So, oh geez, you have the Sabians, you have the Chaldeans, you have fire from heaven that come down. Like all this stuff happens, destroys his livestock. There is an earthquake. His sons and daughters are all dead. Um, and his servants have all died, except for the servants that are reporting this to Job. Um, and that's the first test that Job has. And he's fine. And then we can read this too. I think this will be important. Chapter 1, verse 21 and 22, where he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Through all this, Job did not sin. So then again, the accuser goes before God. Then God presents Job again. And then the accuser says, well, yeah, of course, Job is righteous because he himself has not been harmed. So then God allows the accuser to inflict sores on Job so that he himself actually did like physically suffer. And his wife is still alive. And I think we could make a funny little point about that, but it's still something I reflect on. Like, why was his wife left alive when everyone else was dead? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. It's just a funny little thing. So at this point, that's when the friends come in. There's nothing else said about the accuser from this point on. That's the end of that. So he's just sort of left there. And that's when we begin the dialogues. Sorry, I know that's a lot. I'm just working through this myself.
No, you're good. I got an outline. Tell me if it looks good. It's pretty. It's kind of bullet pointing. Can I just rip it off real fast? It's quick, and we can
Yeah.
insert verses to read like in like spots. So basically, the story is fairly simple. Job was a righteous man with a prosperous family. Right? We can add more details if we want. I was like, one day the accuser approaches God and asks about Job's righteousness. Essentially, right?
Mhm.
Essentially, will he be righteous if he's not prosperous? Or alternatively, is he only righteous because he is prosperous? You know?
Yeah.
So God to use Gen Z language, says, "All right, bet." Like, let's do it, and offers a challenge essentially by offering to have Job tested under specific conditions. And I figured we could do an interject to the verse there, of like what those conditions are, like not him himself or whatever. So the accuser
Mhm.
tests, we can summarize what those are if we want to read anything, or we can just like say the accuser tests and takes away these things, and yet Job is still faithful. You know,
Mhm.
and then the accuser goes back to God and basically asks, "Well, you up to Annie, right?" He goes, "He's only faithful because he himself is safe." And God says again, "All right, bet." And allows Job to be inflicted without him dying. Then the accuser still tests Job, and Job is still faithful, right? And so throughout these tests, Job is visited in dialogues with others, right? Which is a big section. I don't know how to summarize that unless you want to hit it, highlight a few dialogues in there for point, like for like
Yes.
you did. Okay. So what we could do is we could subpoint that and put some verse quotes in there and we can read them. I have Blue Letter Bible up, so if you have certain verses that you had in mind, I'm happy to grab them.
Here's an interesting thing. It's actually the second test that invokes all the dialogues. So I don't know if you want to start off by saying Job is tested a second time, and he's still faithful, because that answer doesn't come until the end of the book.
Yeah, and he is faithful. So just and he is faithful, and
But isn't
he's
that, yeah?
the accuser tests
Well,
Job.
that's the first test, right? That you're writing there.
Yeah,
This is the
yeah.
first one.
I can
Yeah,
just put
yeah.
the accuser tests Job, and then we can say the accuser goes back to God and wants to up to Annie, and I can cut out because he is still faithful or whatever.
Yeah. We actually might be able to cut it off here. Wait, are you writing this as a summary of the whole book?
Yeah, is that not okay?
Oh, my bad. No, I was just doing a walkthrough of what we're going to do today, not the whole
Yeah.
book.
Oh well, what are we doing today then? Just 1 and 2?
Yeah, I thought we were gonna. The way we were approaching this was breaking it down into the different climaxes, like the different.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that now. I'm sorry. I, for some reason, thought we were going through the whole narrative. Ben, I'm so sorry. I remember I was talking about that. It's like literally all coming back to me right now.
That's
I
okay.
had it in my mind that we were just going to go through the whole story, and then we were going to like break it in, and like the episodes were going to be the climaxes, but we were just going to do it in bulk. But I'm much prefer not doing it wholesale, uh, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
All
sorry.
right.
So yes, the accuser tests Job again, and then Job is, forgive my editing here. Job is visited and dialogues with others. Wait, Job is tested again, and his friends appear. So no.
And the homies show
Sorry.
up. I wish it
And the
would like. Mhm.
dialogues begin. Sorry.
I should get like a Gen Z translator and see if we could like turn some of this into Gen Z language and just make it funny. But I don't know if that's doing too much because it'll break up the flow. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that might. Yeah, maybe. I don't
But
know.
the accuser goes to God and it's like, Job is sus. And God's like, nah, fam. Sorry.
Oh, geez.
Oh man, I can't help myself.
Hmm.
Oh, I hope our patrons enjoy this content because it's a disaster.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's not. You're not the disaster, Ben.
Third challenge. What? Sorry. I'm like just reading. Oh, I see. Okay. Um. Hmm. This is interesting. In my outline, so I have two. Okay, so Job is dealing with a series. One of the interpretations, one of the things that comes to light, is that it's dealing with a series of challenges to conventional thinking. The first one, people are righteous because they're prosperous. Second one is people are righteous because they're comfortable,
Mhm.
which are related, but they're also different. Because the
Yeah.
first one is essentially people are righteous because they get something positive from it. Like there's a net
Tangible,
benefit. Whereas,
yes.
yeah, the second one is more people are righteous because they're
They're,
comfortable. Not that they get anything from it, but they're in a comfortable state, so it's just easy to be righteous, so to speak.
yeah.
Um, but those two are dealt with before the dialogues begin because those are the tests.
Wasn't that, well, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand the dialogues, they're just basically asking about the meaning of what the tests are testing. Like, how do we understand it? Or am I losing my mind?
No, I mean essentially, like the next point that Job makes and that his friends argue about is that there can be no undeserved suffering. And then after that, it continues. But I almost wonder if we should just stop this time before the dialogues, just do Job
Yeah.
1 and 2, and just wrestle with those two things. There can, people are righteous because they're prosperous. No, I need to rephrase that. Or people are righteous because they're comfortable. Because I feel like there's enough there to actually reflect on and riff about, how
Yeah,
do
I
we
agree.
understand
I
church and
agree.
Christian living in light of that? Because I feel like there's
A
enough
lot.
there, even
Oh,
just
there's a
one of them.
lot.
Yeah. So, and then that would actually make the rest of Job easier because the other 2 points can be summed up pretty quick. So we don't have to, no offense to the dialogues, we don't have to like slog through all these dialogues just to get to those points. Like
Exactly.
this could actually just be 2 episodes, really,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
or
the interesting thing about,
3.
yeah. I mean, like the value of any, like, it's kind of like reading a book that's like about dialogue, right? Like the story plot lines are pretty short, but
Yeah.
what we could do is maybe like 2 or 3 episodes is we could, this is what I was thinking about doing, or at least this is what I thought, is that like after we go over the 2 points today, depending on how long we go, it can be 1 to 2 episodes. We may need to break it up, but we can maybe hit some of the highlights of the dialogues. That gives us a little time to dig in deeper to the dialogues, maybe,
Hmm.
which is fine. I don't know if you're okay with it, but it lets us to dig a little
Yeah.
deeper so we can hit some of the big ones that are important. Like, I don't know that it's necessarily like, we obviously don't need to go through all of them. That's not even doable.
Hmm.
But what we could do is like, here's some really powerful questions that really highlight the things that were going on, that ask it in a way that challenges us, right? Like any good literature does. Does that make any sense?
Say that last point again. Sorry.
We've already hit the 2 big points, so we can kind of hit the highlights of the dialogue to have it illustrate how it asks those questions and ways that make us think about things differently. Does that make sense? Like when you read a good book, or like when you read Dune, right? Like how they ask questions and like how it makes you think about like, oh, you know,
Hmm.
trying to give a good, I don't know, if you don't read a lot of literature, it's hard to give tangible examples because it's like the brothers Karamazov, if you ever read that, right? Like literally the entire book is about brothers getting in rooms and talking to each other about the things they're debating. And the,
Yeah.
the, the story is pretty boring. Like it's literally brothers fighting over an estate for their dad who's still alive, but one of them doesn't want it, but they want him to have some of it because he wants to go be a monk. But like that's not interesting. It's like, okay, cool, like family drama. All
Yeah.
right, we've done that. But like they're talking, like the dialogues go all kinds of different places because
Hmm.
one's an atheist and he's like, I also think the church should run the country, even though I don't believe in God. It's
Right.
like, wait, what? I don't know. But like the way you, like, I don't, if I was going to summarize the Brothers Karamazov to a new reader, I wouldn't tell them every conversation. I'd pick out the big ones, ones that really ask pertinent questions. That doesn't mean that you won't get the same amount of value from the other ones. Just these ones stand out. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
That's, do you need to focus? I can stop talking.
No, I'm listening. I'm listening. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm like, well, wait, do the 2 things that we're going to talk about today, do they actually show up in the rest of Job? And I'm looking at it, and it's just like suddenly clicking to me, and I'm like, actually, yeah, the rest of Job wrestles with those 2 questions: Are people righteous because righteousness makes them prosperous, or are people righteous because they're comfortable? And they do wrestle with that, and in the wrestling with it, they also end up challenging a couple other assumptions to conventional wisdom. And
Exactly.
I just learned something. That's really interesting.
So don't sell yourself short, Ben, because definitely when we were talking about this last week, you definitely mentioned what you just said.
I did?
Yes, maybe you forgot, but you definitely talked about it. That's why I'm bringing it back up.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny.
Woo, that's great. That's
All right.
funny.
All right. So, all right. So we're just going to do 1 and 2. So basically what you just wrote here. What are some things now that we're actually doing this, I just need to think through. All right, are we just trying to create a conversation that's not natural?
Uh,
People are all right. First proposition: people are righteous because they're prosperous. No, again, I want to reword that. I'm sorry. People are righteous because they benefit from being righteous. There.
yeah.
Is that a fair way to say it? Okay, yeah.
I think prosperous is still good because I think that brings in like a modern context to make it simple of like
Mm,
Joel Osteen's prosperity gospel. But you
yeah,
can still say, I'm going to use this term and I'm going to mean specifically this, like prosperous, but also you tangibly benefit from being faithful. But
yeah.
that's like those are, but there's a reason they continue to use those terms. I don't think
Mm,
it's bad language. I think they're similar, comfort is, but like I have to challenge myself. I live a comfortable Christianity. I don't gain anything from being a Christian. In fact, it costs me more than I gain from it in terms of tangible benefits.
yeah,
But it doesn't require enough, like so much for me that I'm uncomfortable. Well, and that question is whether that's right or wrong, right? That's really what we're dealing with on this
yeah.
case versus the other one as well.
Mm,
Does that make any?
yeah. Are
Which
we
is,
differentiating? I think we need to differentiate the 2 points a little bit more. So the first one, yeah, prosperous. Okay, I like that word, but I guess the more general idea because we get something from it. Whereas the second one is more in terms of like, my life is pretty easy right now, so it's just easy for me to be righteous, whatever that means, right?
yeah,
Like I'm not going through any hardship that's challenging like what I'm doing. So therefore, I don't actually have to wrestle with why am I righteous. I just do it because I'm just living a comfortable life, and it just seems convenient to me. Like it just fits, whatever.
I don't know if convenience is the right word as much as like I would illustrate it, and maybe we should save this for the discussion. I don't know, but like I would illustrate it in the sense of like I think the implication is like I want to call it like a monotonous life or a simple life or an easy life. Like so think about I don't
Well, I
know.
guess like people who are what's the term? Cultural Christians? I don't know if that's a term or not. Like people who are Christian just because like their family went to church, so they went to church, but they never had to like actually wrestle with it. So like their Christianity was convenient in that regard.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
that's a
like,
fair like, or it just was assumed. You know what I mean? This is what people do,
yeah.
right?
Like that could be one aspect of it, sure. Yeah.
Well,
But
it's a
like are you like you
well,
meet
maybe
people
that's the point of the
who
discussion. Maybe this is what we should just
yeah.
talk about. Maybe this is what we should riff on.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I mean, like these are 2 points though, and so I'm trying to keep them a little separate
Yeah.
because I do feel like there's a difference. Because the one is just based on you're righteous because of things unrelated to your faith but are happening around your life, whereas the other point, the first one, is you're righteous because righteousness actually gives you something.
I read something the other day, and if I can remember what it is, I'm going to go find it, the pull a quote. But it was about how it was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. There's a section under faith where he talks about if we're faithful because of what we've benefited from.
Hmm.
Um, like that's just another
Speaks.
exercise in controlling God, and
Hmm.
which is an absurd thing to do. And he says it's akin to like, well, no, that's a different analogy, but yes, like, I knew I read this the other day. Well, that's see, I think that's a nice question because it's questioning motives, it's questioning our individual motives, and like it's questioning like who we are, like, and like what kind of God are we serving, or are we even serving a God as anybody other than ourselves if we're not, like, if we're only doing it for the tangible benefit. And that seems sophomoric, but like that doesn't have to be a tangible benefit of money. That can
Hmm.
be a tangible benefit of salvation.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'll just be good so that way I don't go to hell. But that's
Hmm.
not like learning to love your creator, to fall in love and to commit to the faith. Like there's no
Hmm.
intimacy or interplay there, right? And it requires literally nothing of you. You only, I mean, like it's a transaction really, and it's insurance. Like hey,
Yeah.
God's Geico, and you're like, all right, my Sundays are my premiums. My Sundays and volunteer work, my premiums. My tithe. So
Hmm.
like that's all it costs me, and I will absolutely do it so that I can buy my ticket to go. Versus like if we like that's the first discussion. That's the prosperous question. I think it's an interesting
Yeah.
thing to talk about because
Hmm.
I don't think we always talk about it in those terms. We always talk about it like you shouldn't believe things that make you get money. Well, maybe you should only like not. Maybe you shouldn't just buy in simply to go to heaven. Maybe there's
Hmm.
more to it than that. Who knows? What do I know? Secondly, the other thing that I think is really interesting is the comfort question, and I think you nailed it. It's like this is kind of who we are. Because like I was thinking about the context of a Jewish person, you're born into that.
Mhm.
Like you know what I mean? Like it, like kind of like what you just described with like my parents went to church. That's what we do is we go to church. I just go to church, but like you don't wrestle with the questions, and so their faith is real, but it seems kind of small, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
because it just seems like another part of a traditional middle class life, especially here in the States. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you think those are good
Mhm.
questions to talk about? Like good talking points?
I think so. The second one, though, now that I'm thinking of it, I'm trying to wonder: is there a better way we could ask it that ties more into what Job is actually wrestling with? Because that
So,
had to do more with like his physical comfort. Like he was a
okay.
physically comfortable person, and that's why the accuser was like, "Well, yeah, you took everything away, so okay, I guess he can be righteous without needing to be prosperous, but he's still comfortable. Like he, but if you actually like inflicted him with sores and like brought physical discomfort to him, then it would be a challenge for him."
Well, how is that
Which I still think
different?
relates. Like that's
Yeah, because I
just
mean,
what
if
we
you
talked about was like one articulation of that. But yeah.
right, well, and that's the point. Like, I mean, but like, think about it. Like, you know, like if you have a nice, healthy family, it's pretty easy to be a Christian.
Mhm.
You know what I
Right. I
mean?
mean, like there's a reason we admire people who go through like these really testing times, who face really difficult moments, but yet they still like hold on to their faith,
Yeah,
even though
exactly.
they're absolutely miserable.
Yeah, and it's
But
because it
it's
means something to them. There's a love there. There must be some kind of genuine faith there. It's kind of, I mean, think about even more tangible terms like a marriage, right? Like
yeah.
sometimes some of the best marriages had a lot of rough patches in them, you know, because
Hmm.
you had to work with your partner to get closer. And sometimes the marriages that are like a little quote unquote too easy on the surface, maybe it's because it's convenient to be with each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's challenging, you know what I mean? Not that like that's everybody, but like that there's an illustration there, not that one requires the other, but I'm just trying to bring it to light. Or is that a bad analogy?
No, I think that works.
Cool. But because we're getting into some good stuff, and I don't want to keep going. This is pre-show, and we're 45
Yeah.
minutes into the pre-show. Do you want to start recording sooner rather than later? Or do you want to keep like moving forward? I think we got enough to talk
Um,
about, and then we can. I think you should save some of those specifying and differentiating of comfort for our discussion because that gives us more stuff to talk about and riff off the cuff.
okay.
Unless you want to plan it out now, it's fine. But I think we're good when we riff.
Yeah. I think it's fine. Yep.
I always feel like I just like talk at you, and you're just like, I just submit. I'm tired. I'm over it.
No, like I'm just because sometimes the stuff you say is just like you just say it, and I'm like, yeah, it's good. Like I just don't,
Okay. As long as
and
I'm
I'm
not just
just
like
yeah.
talking you into submission, you know?
Oh no, no, not at all. I just find it really interesting. And sometimes you say things, and I'm like, I gotta chew on that a little bit. So, which is I feel bad. So like when we had Sylvester on, I feel like there was a couple times where I said something. Okay, it's like you would say something, and then Sylvester would talk, and then Sylvester would ask a question, and I'd be like, I want to go back to what Jordan said like 10 minutes ago because I was thinking about it. And then, like, not that I wasn't listening to Sylvester, it's just I finally was just like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Or
Now
like,
I go, now I want to riff on that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And
like
that,
when
yeah.
I was editing it, I definitely saw that happen at least twice. And I was like, I wonder if anyone caught that and thought that I was like just being
You
so
should tell
rude to
Sylvester
Sylvester, just
that.
like dismissing him
Did
completely.
you have you should just send him a message and be like, hey man, just did some editing. It turns out I did listen to you if you ever listened to the pod. I just wanted to go back because I had been thinking about it and I just needed to like That's funny. I love that guy to death.
Yeah. I mean, I eventually did come back, but there was one point it was like so blatant. Sylvester just like finished making a really good point. And he said, "Now what do you guys think about that?" And I was like, Jordan, I really like what you said earlier." Just like totally skirted around it. I was like, I can't believe I just did that.
Oh man, that's really funny. That's so funny. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
I want to tell him so bad.
you can. It's like, dude, did you watch that video? Ben totally just dissed you,
Ben
like
hates your
straight up.
guts. I'm just kidding. He doesn't hate you. Um, I think Sylvester had a ton of fun coming on. I really do, and I think
Yeah.
he wants to come back, and I'd love to have him back. I gotta tell you though, I've been thinking so much about what he said about like he's like I want a space at your table. He's like, at a Christian
Hmm.
context, I want to take communion with you, and I was like,
Hmm.
I literally am like, I don't. You'd say when and where, dude. As long as we have like some ordained minister.
All right. I think I'm good. All right, so I'll do some background, common interpretation, some considerations going into it, which I actually don't know if I'll have. Actually, I'm going to take that out because I already touched on those. And then you can touch on previewing the question. And then you said you want to walk through the narrative. Did we decide
Yeah,
who's doing
because I
that?
feel like if I can walk through the narrative, like I feel like one, like this is a little. How do I say this without sounding stupid and demeaning to myself? But I just really feel like my value on this is going to come less from the interpretation because my Hebrew background is not great, and I don't have as much access to those. Like I don't have Old Testament like stuff that you do. So I think my value will be in being a dialogue partner and more of like a mirror to reflect ideas and like a framing device rather than being the primary like point maker. I feel like that's going to fall right in your wheelhouse if that makes sense.
That's fine. I mean, it's not going to mess me up any
Yeah, I know,
if you
but
say this. I mean, actually, once you get to the accuser part, if you just want to say, if you just want to throw a reference and be like, do you want to just quickly explain why we're saying the accuser instead of Satan? And then I can just very quickly just bring up the Hebrew part, and then we can just move on. Because I don't feel like that's a point worth
spending a ton of
stopping
time on.
at the end and like going back to revisit that. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
agreed. Yeah. So
Like we can just
how's
say it. Just there it is.
yeah. So we'll intro with like the intro to Job. So you'll welcome us to the podcast. Can I kick it off by just saying we're gonna go over the book of Job? Um, we're gonna start by doing a little bit of background. We're gonna walk you through the first few chapters and then break down the book from here so that way I can lay out an outline, or do you not want to do that because we haven't finished our outline yet?
No, that's good. You can do that.
Okay. All right. And then I'll transition to you for the background literature questions and I can just kind of like uh, I, so I listened to the Bible for the Bible Project podcast to kind of prep for this a
Hmm.
little bit,
Yeah.
not to get the content because I don't know Tim Mackey. I don't always trust him super well, but simply because one thing their podcast does well is they let Tim kind of teach, but also it feels like a conversation because the other person, I think it's Travis, like frames it. And that's where I figured my role is going to be more on this one because like, how little I don't have the biblical knowledge for the Old Testament that you do. I don't have it for the New Testament either, but definitely not the Old Testament.
That's all right.
Ask me
No,
about
that's
Karl
good.
Barth though. I got you, but like,
Nice. All right, cool. Um, so weird. All right, here we go.
uh huh.